This is a Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined by my co-host once again, Brian Solomon. How's it going?
It's going all right, Al. Happy to be here, tired but ready to go.
Yes, you and I both woke up about 20 minutes ago, so pardon us if not together. It's separate. I rolled over, Brian. You got to get
kayfabe, Al. Kayfabe.
And joining us for the first time, Cameron Hawkins, PWI contributing writer. You know him also from The Ringer, Yahoo Sports, jack of all trades. What's up, Cam?
Hey, not too much, man. Appreciate y'all for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got an interesting feature in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, so I want to talk to you a bit about that. And we have a lot of ground to cover. I expect to be talking a lot about R-Truth today. I didn't, I don't know that I could have predicted that a week or two, but he's probably like the top name in the news. So we're ready to have a thorough conversation about all things Ron Killings and a lot of other WWE news. With Jey Uso dropping the title back to Gunther. What does that mean both for Jey and for Gunther and for the world heavyweight title? I think it really creates kind of a real interesting situation going forward. We've got fallout from Money in the Bank. We've got a Jacob Fatu official babyface turn and a lot more. So stay tuned. Right now, let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, available now. It is our Supercards issue, where we cover several of the biggest events in all of wrestling. I think it's 9 different events, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there's 10, including WrestleMania and so much more. I think last week I counted and it was something like 55 pages of coverage inside the magazine. Pick it up at pwi-online.com, the one issue, or certainly makes a lot of sense to subscribe. One of the reasons I wanted to have Cam on, one of the few non-supercard things in here is a look at the 10th annual Wale Mania, which was another key event over WrestleMania weekend in Vegas. And you both set the scene for what the one event was like then, and also talk about the history some. So for people who aren't familiar with, and I think a lot of people are by now, it's become one of these kind of institutions, WrestleMania weekend. Tell them what Wale Mania is all about.
Essentially, Wale, award-winning, multi-platinum hip-hop artist, is a huge wrestling fan, to the point where, he was like a Dave Meltzer guy, like early on, like a decade plus ago. And so when WrestleMania was in San Diego, they wanted to get together and basically have kind of a getaway for the wrestlers who weren't actually on the WrestleMania card, like a chance for them to do something they enjoy without having to sit backstage, which started out as like a dinner at a bar, eventually became him performing at that dinner, which turned into like block party, festival, interview show, like over time, right? They started to do like these venues like your House of Blues or your Novo in LA. And so, yeah, that's really what it is. It's a big celebration of wrestling with a hip hop backdrop where you might see your favorite rapper, you might see your favorite actor, you might see a couple of your favorite wrestlers kind of in a different environment. It's typically the Thursday before WrestleMania. You get your $20, $30, $40, $50 ticket. You get your VIP ticket. You just really come and hang out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found really interesting, and I think the photos in your story, which are here, kind of spell it out, is that I told you guys in the email, it's sort of become like the demilitarized zone of WrestleMania. In that, I mean, you see here photos of TNA stars, AEW stars, WWE stars together on stage, laughing, having a good time. I think that's so interesting. I mean, how much of that, how did it evolve to that? Has there ever been any backlash? Would this have flown under, the Vince McMahon regime?
What's really interesting is that, like, this year in particular was the first year that AEW talent really couldn't attend, and it was more a scheduling thing. I don't know if it was necessarily by design, but man, I remember the first event that I worked was WrestleMania in Dallas 4 years ago, and man, everybody was there. I remember, this is like early with Trick and Mello and Chavo Guerrero and Ricky Starks is there and Tasha Steeles is there. It's just kind of an understanding that and you guys know better than most. All these guys hang out together and train together, and I remember talking to MJF years ago, and he was telling me, like, even in AEW, like, we all get together and watch the WWE pay-per-views. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing on the other side. Like, these guys are peers. And so, no, I have not really seen, like, a pushback. And again, you talk about being, like, under the Vince regime, 4 years ago, it was still that, and this has been a thing, 10 years this year. And so, really, it was around, I think, Wally Mania 4, where this thing started to really bubble up and be big. And I think Rey Mysterio was the very first, like, guest of honor. And, everybody was there. Like, Samoa Joe was there. Like, it's always kind of been an understanding that these people are all part of the same community. So, no real pushback. Again, this year, I think it was more a scheduling thing.
Well, I saw Ricochet there, right? Wasn't
yeah, God. We, this is like a little bit after I had written about him for Yahoo, and him and I have a really good rapport. And Samantha actually helped me write that piece, and so she was there performing too, and they're there with all their friends. And yeah, Ricochet did get to make it. One of the few. Again, they didn't get to be too deep, but he did get to make it out to support Samantha. So yeah, but like the year before, or 2 years ago in LA, like everybody's there. You got your. Like, I remember Hobbs being there, like Hobbs just being the biggest guy in the world, right? I'm backstage tossing champagne bottles back and forth to Adam Cole and Britt Baker. Like, yeah, everybody comes out. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like a great time. I think you did a great job of capturing what Wally Mania is all about. Check it out in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Again, pick it up at pwi-online.com. Subscribe. We've got bundle deals where you get both the digital and the print edition at a discounted price, and also while you're on the website, you can pick up back issues. We've got great packages for back issues that going way back and in really fantastic mint condition. Get it all at pwi-online.com. All right, let's talk a little wrestling again. I mean, who could have predicted that R-Truth of all people would be the newsmaker heading into the summer? But he is for all kinds of reasons. His firing, the groundswell of support from fans that led to him getting his job back, making a surprise return at Money in the Bank, attacking John Cena. We find out he's got a new contract. He's got a new name. He's looking to ditch the R-Truth name and character. Cuts his hair on national TV. Seems to be taking more of a serious approach going forward. And now the question, well, there's all kinds of questions, but one of them is, what is the ceiling for this 53-year-old wrestler who really for the better part of the last 10, 20 years has been a comedy act and kind of at best a mid-card comedy act. And for a lot of that time, way down in the cards, essentially, almost an enhancement talent. But I think along the way, always really beloved. I mean, the fans always had an affection for him because he's so entertaining. But now we're getting a different side of him. Brian, I'll start with you. Generally, what do you think about how WWE handled this whole situation?
Boy, well, I mean, it's an interesting question because then you have the whole issue where everybody's talking about, was this whole thing a work? Yeah. And Triple H kind of slyly seeming to hint that at the press conference. I don't believe that's true. I think that's him trying to take control of the narrative here and say, well, like the old, well, I meant to do that. I don't think that that's what happened here at all. I mean, it's a strange situation because if you think about it now, it's going to be interesting to see what the actual plan is because he's lost to Cena. They did that thing. He lost that. And then he lost another match, right? What was his last match on the way out there on last week or something?
Was it Mateo? Was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he lost. So he did a job there, that was like a typical kind of R-Truth appearance of what we've gotten used to over the last like 10 to 12 years. So they're hitting a reset button. I don't know. I can't see them having him go after Cena again after they just did that and he lost. So it's kind of like wide open at what they're going to actually do with him. I mean, R-Truth it's one of those litmus tests where you could tell if somebody like actually knows the business or not. You know, whether if they consider R-Truth to be a joke or not a great performer or whatever, they obviously don't know what they're talking about, because it all depends on what position you're put in. But R-Truth, was always great. I mean, the guy was great in TNA. He was a world champion. He was great. I was there in WWE when he had his first run, and they didn't really do a lot of good things with him. They had him in a tag team with Road Dogg, and it just kind of went nowhere. But I mean, I remember him even when he was in Memphis Championship Wrestling, when he was starting out, which was a developmental at the time, and he was one of their top prospects. None of that was his fault, I don't think. So I mean, he's always had the potential. At age 53, I don't really know. I mean, one of my rites of passage as a wrestling fan was realizing that I'm older than all the wrestlers now that I'm watching on TV. And R-Truth now is maybe the only one where I'm not, at least on a national, wrestling program. So, I mean, I'm just sitting here waiting and wondering what they're going to do with it. I don't even know if they know or if they knew at first. But as far as the whole thing of, what I totally lost my train of thought. There was a question about him that we were talking about, but
what's his upside, the ceiling, how far he could go?
Yeah, and I just think that the idea of the fans, right, hijacking the show or sort of getting their way, right? And I mean, I thought of that at first when it was the issue was raised, like, well, this is opening a Pandora's box. Now they're going to try to constantly bring people back and all this, or change the course of the show. I mean, honestly, I'm not that terribly concerned about that. I'm really not, because I think that WWE has gotten a lot better, and wrestling companies in general, about locking things down when they need to and buckling down when they need to. This was a situation where they probably looked at it and said, you know what have we got to lose here? We bring the guy back. The fans are going to be psyched. It's going to be a cool moment. Maybe we could give him one last run. Like, there's no downside to this. But if they find a situation in the future where it's something they really don't want to do and the fans want them to do it, WWE has gotten very good at saying, well, too bad, we're not going to do it. And I don't think they're going to have trouble doing that in the future. I really don't.
Cameron, your thoughts on this whole thing? Again, it's interesting. When I saw him attack Cena, I did jump to the conclusion that, like, oh, we're getting another Cena Truth program. But then I've heard, and I think Brian sort of touched on it, that maybe not. Maybe that was the receipt for John Cena, and now you move, a Truth to something different, maybe a little lower on the cards, but still prominently featured. But there are those who are saying, no, go all the way. The guy is hot. John Cena, R-Truth, or Ron Killings at SummerSlam, and put the world title on Ron Killings. Do you think that's a possibility?
Like, you're never going to get me to not endorse a black man winning a world title. I cannot do it. I think what's really interesting, it being Money in the Bank. My last thing for Yahoo was actually revisiting Cena and Punk from 14 years ago. And right before that, Cena fought R-Truth at Capital Punishment. So kind of the last time that he was kind of a serious character, like at that time, right? I think that I always say this: certain wrestlers have a superpower. In particular, Jeff Hardy and Randy Orton have this ability to still look like Jeff Hardy and Randy Orton kind of always looked. And R-Truth has that, like amazing genes, amazing physique, right? So he is 53, right? And so he probably can't jump as high, can't run as fast, but he's still that facsimile of the guy who was always around. Again, he occupies this really, really unique space in that he worked there for so long. He has a level of goodwill that other people don't have. He's also, again, a long tenured black man, which does not happen a whole lot. And so he has support from all these different areas that other people don't have. Like, I was always a big fan of Dakota Kai, right? But Dakota Kai does not have the longevity. Dakota Kai does not have the resume to have the same groundswell of support. I think that it was kind of a sign of goodwill from WWE, and also like, get off our backs, like leave us alone with all this. But I do think that, there was the receipt with Cena, and now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alan Bryan, from how I understand it, R-Truth wasn't let go. They were going to let his contract run out. Bringing him back was kind of an adjustment or an amendment to the contract that he had. So it put a bit more time on it, but it's not like a new 2 or 3 year deal. Am I gauging that kind of right?
You know, that's possible, actually, because there was a whole bunch around R-Truth of people that they were doing the same thing with, where that seems to be the new thing now, where they're not gonna outright release you, but they're just gonna quietly not renew your contract. I'm not for sure about that, but I wouldn't be surprised. And the thing is, it certainly would have made it a lot easier to turn this around as quickly as they did. That's what shocked me the most. Was I thought, like, if something like this happens, it usually takes a while where they're just like, wow, these people really aren't going to shut up about this, like weeks and weeks of it. And it was like almost instantaneous. There was 1 week's worth of TV where the people were chanting for R-Truth, and they were just like, you know what? All right, let's bring him back. So, I mean, that would have been a lot easier to do if they were just telling him to stay home rather than having him release him. Having released him, they could just say, you know what? Why don't you report to TV on Monday?
Yeah. It's like a lot of us like our coworkers. They seem to love him. Like the people backstage seem to really love him. And
the shock of what happened. I mean, there were wrestlers who were like, who was it? Somebody unfollowed WWE. I think it was The Miz.
It was as big a backlash as I ever remember seeing.
Gunther was deleting all of his like WWE related Instagram pic or something like that. Like, people were talent were going nuts, and so I mean, that's a big deal. In fact, that might have been more of the impetus than anything. Maybe more than the fans. The revolt of the talent being like, no, you can't do this. You know,
I also think about something you brought up, Cam, and that is, you know, for better or for worse, I think rightfully so. WWE's gotten some heat as of late for its inability to feature black wrestlers prominently on now. There's some qualifying here because you see them pretty prominently featured in the women's division with Bianca and Jade and Naomi all getting a lot of TV time, big pushes. Both tag team champions are black tag teams, and NXT. They feature black wrestlers all the time. But for some reason, you know, at the very top, you know, the main event singles scene in Raw and SmackDown, it's been years. I mean, I don't even know who the last one. Would we go back to Lashley or Big E, you know,
and Lashley is somebody who, I mean, that whole crew there with MVP, and those guys are not exactly on Triple H's like list of favorite people, and vice versa. So I mean, that's not even the best example, right? I mean, it's all. I don't even know if he would have done that if he was in charge. We don't know. I think it was
just under the optics. It was a really bad look to in the middle of getting this kind of heat going and cutting R-Truth. That said, when it happened, I've got to say, you know, from a business perspective, I was like, yeah, I get it. You know, he's 53 years old. He's been in the company 20-something years. I saw the program with John Cena at Saturday Night's Main Event as kind of like the parting gift. Like, on your way out, we're going to give you one last big program with the biggest star in wrestling. And Cena's got a very limited number of matches. And I thought it was sort of a nice thing that they gave one of them to R-Truth. But I was, I guess I was surprised in that he was prominently featured, but looking at it very kind of coldly from a business perspective, I got it. Why, you know, putting the issue aside of really bad optics while you're not pushing any black wrestlers to fire probably the most popular one that you have.
And I mean this like totally sincerely, right? Because I don't know the guy, but like Carlito was stealing money, and I salute him for stealing money. Like, he was hanging out backstage, he was playing PlayStation, he was eating an apple, and he would do some run-ins. And I was like, man, this is the greatest job in the world, right? And so like him getting released, it was kind of like, hey man, you had a great second run. You got to really just hang out. Like salute to you. That's really cool. But again, the flip side is just R-Truth having like that super longevity. Whether or not he was doing something prominent, it was just kind of a situation where you figured that guy would retire before he got released. You know, like you said, there are all these different things that go into him specifically being released, because working there that long, you occupy like so many different levels of what it means to be in WWE. Again, you're tenured. You don't have a history of getting in trouble. You're unique in that you are a black singles wrestler on a roster that has very few of them. Like there are so many things. But yeah, it wasn't shocking, like you said, in the ecosystem of what's being aired prominently on TV and in programming. But when you hit that many different notes with that many different communities, that's what I think really got people. And like you said, the thing with Miz and Gunther, again, people who I've talked to Gunther, don't know him personally, but I do think there's also the idea of if they can release this guy who's been here forever, who doesn't make waves, who everybody loves, they can release anybody. And so I do think that plays into it too.
I think Miz in particular should have that concern because there's a lot of parallels there between, beyond the fact that they were literally partners, but they play a similar role where they're providing the comic relief. They rarely win. They rarely factor into the title picture, and are getting up there in years. And this is not the for whether you think it was better or not back then. This is not the family business that the McMahons were running. This is corporate TKO, Ari Emanuel, WWE, and they are bean counters, right? And no loyalty, affection for anybody on the roster. I don't know that Ari Emanuel could pick the Miz or R-Truth out of a lineup. And you just see we're paying him how much, and how often is he on TV, and what does he do? He mostly tells jokes. Like, he could go, and he's 50 something years old. So maybe that was part of it too. Is that again, you got to look at it sort of like through optics and PR, and just that. And this is where I think what you touched on before, maybe even more important than the backlash from fans, it was the backlash from wrestlers. If you start to give this perception that these people are ruthless, cold-blooded, have no loyalty for their own talent. Brian, I'll ask you this: how much? One of the really interesting things is that R-Truth, known by a lot of people for his comedy chops, and I think you touched on it. He's shown he could do it all, but he's he'll be remembered as a comedy wrestler primarily, and one of the best. If not, you put him up there with, I don't know, whoever the best was. I'm going to name some names, but I don't want to put him in the same category as that. The flip side of that is that could work against you, right? I mean, you if you're put in the same category as a Santino Marella, right? I mean, right. Nobody's ever clamoring for Santino to get that world title run. So maybe because of that, R-Truth comes back, says, "Don't call me R-Truth anymore. I'm serious now. I'm Ron Killings, and I'm not going to be a comedy actor," which I get for him in that, this is going to be my last run. Let's see how far I could take this and whether I can move into a different position. Flip side that is, that's not what fans were clamoring for, right? I mean, what fans wanted back was, silly R-Truth. So how do you deal with that going forward? Is it a good idea for him to get away from the comedy stuff?
Well, I thought of that, but the reaction, and you can't judge everything just by one crowd reaction, but the reaction to that promo was very positive. It wasn't like they were rejecting what he was doing. You know what I mean? Like they popped for when he said his real name, and they popped for when, his very serious promo. It wasn't like they didn't seem to be disappointed, but it remains to be seen week to week. I was thinking about it, how it could also be a positive in a way, because, people like us and people that have watched a lot of wrestling companies, have been around a while, like, we know that there's a lot more to him than that. Like, we know that the reason they call him R-Truth is because of Ron the Truth Killings. Like, we get that. But for fans who weren't around, weren't watching, weren't born, whatever, this could be like a new and very cool thing. Like, oh my God, I didn't realize this guy was so legit. It could go that way. I mean, that's the optimistic way to look at it, right? I mean, I think that's very possible. It's something new, because one of the problems with R-Truth is, at least, especially before the Cena thing, it had all gotten very old, I think. All the comedy stuff that he did, he'd been doing it for so long, and it was sort of like he had become almost like a mascot. He was like the WWE mascot in a way, and it was almost like a George the Animal Steel kind of thing or something like that. And I just think that thing had run its course. And so I don't know if you want to bring him back and just have him be doing the same stuff. I think this is an interesting thing to try and to see if it works.
I mean, I think that you know what the ceiling is for the comedy stuff, right? We don't know if Ron Killings, the serious singles competitor, can work, but also I think it's sort of like, what have you got to lose, right? I mean,
right. Well, yeah.
Might as well give it a try. One thing that's interesting is that they've got this relationship now with TNA. Could they show some of that footage of Ron the Truth Killings, NWA World Heavyweight Champion?
Well, TNA's already been doing that on, they're very famous on social media for doing that. Like,
it got so fast.
Yeah, they did it instantly. And there was talk that they were immediately interested in bringing him in when it seemed like he was going to be released. So there is that, I could see that happening too. Them doing something like that. The other thing I had read was that he himself very much wanted to transition to Ron Killings because, he's realizing that, yes, okay, they brought me back and they're going to have me stick around, but this is probably not going to last forever. And so by the time they really do let me go, I want to be able to have my name established so that I could use it at conventions
really
and
smart.
Other companies, and people will know who I am. So that was smart.
Yeah. Cameron, where do you go from here with Ron Killings? I think he's in the King of the Ring tournament, right? Does he win again? Does he challenge John Cena at SummerSlam?
I just ran back the Wrestler a couple of days ago, and he's in that briefly, being serious, talking to Randy the Ram. That's like Brian said, like if you were around during that time, those early TNA days, he has really great fire. He's really good at speaking truth to power. No pun intended. And I don't think that's something you lose if that's more or less who you are. I don't know if, again, I can't speak against him winning. I don't know if that's the route you go. I think that his out, as somebody who's very, very, very briefly like been in the main event, I think that his out is something a bit more charming. Whether it's a big win over somebody who doesn't take him seriously, something like that. But I don't think you have him, get in there with Cena and kind of get ran out the building, only to turn around and, be right there in the main event. I think he has a good showing, but I think that it's more of a moral victory for him on his way out, a win against somebody you don't expect him to beat. But, with us only having, 6 months kind of left of this Cena run, expecting, a Punk to be there, probably expecting a few more people who's been in the main event to be there. I don't know if it's necessarily him winning that happens.
Yeah. Because we just discussed it a little, what do you make of the lack of black wrestlers in the main event scene in WWE? Are you willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that just timing wise, that person has not, become apparent and they're in the pipeline, and give us time. We're grooming Trick. We're grooming Obafemi. We're getting these guys in the pipeline to come over and move into the main event scene. But then we see, you could have said that about Carmelo, and he's about as low as you can get on the cards too. His issue, I think, maybe more than others, is size. He's not a real big guy. But is this a good faith, just sort of bad timing? The players, the candidates are not there. Is this just a blind spot? Is it something more sinister?
Don't mess up my media credentials, man. No, I think so. When MVP got really vocal about kind of Triple H and booking, he made it a point to say, I don't think this guy is racist. He was very specific about that. But I also think when you have people in charge who didn't grow up around black men, who have only been around black men like in the workplace and have only competed against black men, I do think there's a disconnect. I think if you look at WWE's writers' room, the writers' room doesn't reflect that particular area of talent. I wouldn't say it's a sinister thing. Like even on the AEW side, I think Swerve's in a great position, but other than Swerve, until Hurt Syndicate got there, it was kind of the same situation. One of my good friends in the business, Ricky Starks, Ricky Saints now, we kind of thought he'd be in that position in AEW, maybe he gets there. But I do think you make a good point in that, like, Trick Williams is undeniable, right? Like an Open Femi is undeniable. If you have a checklist of reasons why somebody might not be in position, right? It's funny. You talk about like Melo's size, like AJ Styles ain't big. Shane Gable ain't big.
Shawn
You know what I mean? Yeah. These are not like huge guys, but like I'm not denying what you're saying, Al. It's just like I do think that people in charge subconsciously find reasons not to push people who don't look like them. Yeah. I think that happens. And it's not necessarily a sinister thing. It's just kind of how the world's worked. But I do think that, like, you look at a Montez Ford, who, by all accounts,
one I think about all the time too is, how are you missing the boat on this guy?
You gotta the thing you gotta understand about Montez is not just like, clearly he's hyper athletic. Clearly he has a fire with the crowd. Clearly he has a connection, but he also has that thing where like women really, really like him.
Great.
Like he checks off like nobody's Roman Reigns, but Tez checks off like all the things you would want.
Covers,
They could do a lot with him. Surprising to me, especially with the push that Bianca has. You would think it would be cool to have them both at that level.
And it's also like, I've always said, and again, Brian, you've talked to Vince McMahon more than me. I've never talked to the guy. But one thing I've always made a point of, even when I was back writing for The Torch, I did this piece called The Ballad of Kofi Kingston. And what it was about was, Kofi was not all-American black athlete, but Vince McMahon always had an affinity for all-American black athlete. From your Tony Atlases, your Shelton Benjamins, your Rocks. Like, that was his thing. And he finally found like that other main eventer in Bianca. But Tez also fits that. You're 6'4", 6'5". You're well over 200 pounds. You're a former Marine. Like, all the things you would want from, an all-American wrestler, somebody who can connect with the crowd and really get them, like, he's right there. He's right there. But again, I think there's a disconnect in understanding the power somebody like that has. And I do think, there is a level of comfort in finding all those things in black women, but not in black men. Again, not a sinister thing, but I do think there is there's a disconnect and a lack of understanding when it's a situation you've never really experienced other than the professional level.
Yeah, I think you nailed that, and I think you nailed how you address this. And it is certainly not by like any kind of quota system, like, oh, we haven't had a black wrestler in the main event in 6 months. Who's here and who's black? You're in the main event next. But it is about representation among the decision makers, right? It's about having that guy in the writing room among the decision makers. Maybe it's R-Truth's next act. If as he gets older in the business, I mean, could he play a role there? But you're absolutely right. With Tez specifically, I've wondered how much, if any of it, is loyalty to Dawkins and the concern of making him the Marty Jannetty and sort of leaving him behind, which is admirable, but also you can't operate that way. I mean,
he would be the first wrestler in history to make that decision. If I mean, no one ever. I mean,
Dawkins could do really well in singles also.
And I want to say one thing about that, because actually, Cam, when you were talking about the subconscious aspect, I think that's a big part of this. And I'm not trying to let people off the hook, but because we also saw this with Tony Khan early on. People forget this because he absolutely course corrected, but that was a big thing in the early years of AEW.
Sure.
And he listened. I think Paul Levesque has a lot harder time listening. He's the kind, I've also been around him as well, not in the position of power that he has now, but he's the kind of guy, which, hey, I can relate to this, where if you tell him what to do, he's going to be less likely to do it because he doesn't want to be told what to do or change course from what he wants to do. But I think when you have guys like Paul Levesque and Tony Khan, who grew up as wrestling fans and they love wrestling and it's burned into their brain, this old school wrestling, whether they think about it consciously or not, I think one of the downsides of that is the image in their head of big time pro wrestling is a bunch of white guys. Yeah. And that's just how they're programmed to think. And the craziest thing of all is, of all people in the universe, Bill Watts, who actually said racist things and may have held racist views, was smart enough as a businessman. One of the most brilliant things he ever said, which I agree with 100%. He would always go, you know, when you look at pro wrestling, the most fake thing about it, where you could tell it's fake and it's not real, you compare it to every other sport. Compare it to every other sport: baseball, basketball, boxing, football. Why is everybody white? So he was smart enough to say, to make it look convincing, real, like a sport, we have to push these great black athletes. And he would do it with JYD and Ron Simmons and, you know, Butch Reed and, like, of all people. But I mean, like, that is so completely true, because it becomes so obvious when you watch wrestling and you go, you know, it's a bunch of white guys. But if you're growing up with wrestling and that's the wrestling in your mind, that's what you are, I think, subconsciously trying to replicate. So I think that's what they have to get past.
Listen, I grew up playing sports in Texas. Racists have done right by me. Okay. They have put me in position to succeed more often than not.
Yeah. I do think it gets down to, like, the pipeline thing. And in that sense, there is reason for optimism, because in as much as NXT is the pipeline, you do see them getting it right more in NXT. I mean, I think the last, I don't know how many main events have featured at least one black wrestler in NXT's big shows, going back probably years now, right? It's about moving those guys and getting them in the pipeline, because I don't see, you know, there's a Montez and maybe a couple others, but it's not like you look at the main roster of WWE and say, look at this wealth of talented black wrestlers that you could be pushing and you're not pushing. They're just not there. But they're not there because you're not moving them in there, because, you know, they exist out in the world, you know, in the independents, all over the place, and all dreaming of one day coming to work for you. So it's making that effort to bring them in.
Yeah. And another note on that really quickly, you talk about NXT, like I interviewed Shawn Michaels for The Ringer, and, you know, I asked him, you know, straight up, is there something you're doing consciously to put, you know, black men in that position? And he was like, I would love to take credit for that. He was like, but no, I look around, I see who I think is the best, like who's working the hardest, who seems to be, like, really in a position to succeed, and that's what I go with. And, you know, Shawn Michaels, like me, you know, grew up San Antonio, grew up a military brat. So again, his experience growing up is going to be very different from a Paul Levesque, in that, you know, San Antonio, the biggest military city, you know, in the country, he's around a bunch of black people. He's around black athletes. Like that's part of it. You know, it's that really big melting pot. So for him, like, it doesn't make sense not to go with who's objectively the best, because that's the system that he grew up in. That's what he came up around. So again, it is really interesting. And like you said, it is a circle back. It does not seem to be like some type of sinister thing. It's life experience and an understanding of how this thing should work. You know, and you say Paul Levesque's not a big sports guy, right? Like, he's a wrestling guy. I do think it's really interesting to see, like, a Tyrese Halliburton, you know, come into the fold. It's interesting to see a Travis Scott and all the hip hop artists in Atlanta when they did which show was that? There was a Bad Blood, I want to say, in Atlanta.
Yes.
It's interesting to see black athletes and entertainers be really highlighted, but it not being reflected on the main roster as, like, black men in that position. So, you know, we all kind of hope it improves, because everybody from whatever background. Whoever's the best should be up there. And there's a couple of guys I think who would be able to prove that they belong there if given the chance. So
and there's reason for optimism in that Levesque obviously values Shawn Michaels' opinion very much, put him in that position to kind of be the arbiter of who's going to become a future star in WWE. So as much as he looks to Michaels, and Michaels is looking to these young black wrestlers, that bodes well, I suppose. And we'll see. I mean, with some of these guys, like a Trick Williams, it's like, all right, when are we doing this? Right? Like now we're a few, and I get that he, but like you're saying, you could always find the excuse not to push someone. Could Trick be a little bit better? Could he? Does he have some room to develop? Absolutely, but
maybe if he came out with a stuffed iguana, it might have helped.
We'll get into that in a moment. But transitioning to the next thing, I wanted to talk a bit about Jey Uso and Gunther. A lot of people caught by surprise. Is the Jey Uso experiment over? It lasted 2 months. From winning the Royal Rumble to WrestleMania, a couple title defenses, and now you take the title back off of him, put it back on Gunther. Do they put it back on Jey Uso? I don't know. Brian, what did you make of this decision? How does it bode for Jey Uso as one of the top guys in WWE?
I don't think this was their original plan. That's not the sense I get. I think that they had wanted to transition Gunther away from being a champion, since he's been a champion for so long. They wanted to have him do other things, like they had the Pat McAfee thing and stuff like that. And these days, post Attitude Era and all that, it's very rare to change a title, especially a world title, on regular weekly television like that. And it's almost like in the old days when they would do it on like a house show or like some Coliseum videotaping, like with Flair and Bret Hart, and you knew something was up, because that's not the normal way to do it. It seems like this was they really wanted to get it off of him quick, and they didn't want to wait for a premium live event or something. And I get the sense, two things, that Jey Uso seems to be, he was spinning his wheels, I think he, and that's not, booking is booking. It's not really always the wrestler's fault. I think he's one of those guys and I think this is said way too often about people that don't deserve it, but he is one of those guys that's much more valuable in the chase than actually having the title. Like, it just seemed like we know how over he was and is, and how people love him, and they still do. But it really did seem like from the moment he won it, after that really huge, first TV after he won it and everything, he just seemed to be steadily losing steam, just gradually, little by little, nothing alarming. And so I think that's just maybe not the spot for him. It's just not. And so they put it back on Gunther, who is just this perfect monster heel champion, he's like the one heel that doesn't get cheered. And it's not because people find him boring or anything like that. I think it's just because he's so good at what he does that there's nothing about him that makes people want to cheer him. And yet they enjoy watching his matches. They enjoy watching him destroy people. They also want to see if somebody could beat him. Like, that has not gotten old. And I've also heard the rumblings that maybe this is leading to Goldberg, which, for the love of God, I hope is not the case. But that would be another reason why it would make sense for them to be doing this now. They're saying, okay, we got to get him ready for Goldberg. Like, dear God, I really hope not, but it could be that as well.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, the Goldberg, and I hadn't even thought about that, but it's less reason to put the world title on Gunther, because
unless they want to put it on Goldberg, maybe that's the thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be crazy. I mean, the way to do that, look, I've said it, and I believe if and when you do Gunther and Goldberg should beat Gunther. I mean, I think that's the way you book that match. He should not win the world title doing it. I mean, that's insane, So putting the world title on Gunther is just a complication. Unless, I mean, the thing you do is you put the world title on Gunther and you have Goldberg cost him the world title somewhere along the way, whether it's back to Jey Uso or Ron Killings or whoever. That's fine. I'm going to push back a little bit on a couple things. I think Jey Uso was working pretty well as World Heavyweight Champion. I get what you're saying, that the character works, kind of like the Ricky Steamboat thing works better as the underdog fighting from underneath. And I think it's one of the reasons that match on Monday was so compelling, and I really liked it. And I thought Jey did a great job showing the heart and pushing back. That doesn't work as well when you're the champion. But you could tell the story that in every match there's some doubt whether he could pull this off, and he keeps on pulling it off, and he keeps on defending the world title. Has he lost some steam? Yes. I still think he's super over, super popular. I don't know if the metrics show differently. I think he grew into. I think he looks good with the world title. I think he was kind of a modern world champion for today, and super over. If you don't have Cody as the world champion now, so he kind of fills that role as the over babyface champion, while Cena's got the other title. And the other thing I'd push back, I think Gunther's great. I think he plays his character really well. It is pitch perfect. I think we saw in the first world title reign, we'd be lying if he's saying that he was like over like gangbusters. I think there's kind of a ceiling to how far you can go with that character, who is sort of deliberately kind of monotonous and very sort of gray and colorless and
I don't find him to be that at all. Not at all.
I think for a certain kind of fan, you could appreciate it, and I certainly appreciate it. But I think others, casuals, and that's not a good term for mainstream fans, I think are just like, yeah, where's the pizzazz with this?
I don't think he's not getting an indifferent reaction, though. I don't think he is. I think the fans generally respect his ability, and he's kind of seen as this intimidating force. I don't think there's indifference to him. Like, I think he's the kind of guy, like, people still think when he comes out, it's like, okay, something is going to go down here. Like, someone's going to get really hurt. I think, I'm not saying he's a Brock Lesnar, but he's got that kind of thing that Brock had, which is like the fans just look at him as a very, very dangerous person and a force of nature. And I don't think that that's colorless. I mean, he's not that's his whole persona. And I think it works. I don't find him to be boring. It's not like he's, 1992 Bob Backlund or something. I mean, he's not.
I don't think I think he's playing his role perfectly. So it's nothing he's doing. I just think, and I think the Brock Lesnar comparison is a good one, because that is sort of the goal, the sort of the high water mark for that kind of character, and he wasn't that, right? So, which is to say, if you're the killer, you're the giant, who's destroying everybody, the unstoppable force, then there's a certain expectation for that. And I think, I don't know, they never put him in a real main event. The whole time he had the world title, he was always kind of underneath. When they did it once with Cody in Saudi, they had Cody beat him. Right. I just felt a lot of times when he would, be in one of those positions or his match was featured, I felt kind of like a collective exhale from a lot of fans, like, okay, here's a Gunther match.
Well, the big difference between him and Brock is that Gunther sells. I mean, he sells a lot. In fact, he probably sells too much, because he does when he. There's been plenty of matches of his. Because look, I'll confess, whatever, full disclosure, he's one of my absolute favorite wrestlers to watch. Like, his match on a card, like, I want to watch. But there's a lot of matches I watch with him where I go, like, he's giving this guy way too much. Like, he should not be looking this hurt. Like, he really needs to be more powerful. And it's almost like when the bell rings, sometimes the match doesn't quite fit his persona coming in. And that's something that Brock did really well, where it's like, he's just, you knew when his matches were just different from everybody else's matches. It was just like a series of explosive moves. There wasn't a lot of selling. It was just like very simple, straight ahead. And that was something that definitely put him on another level than a Gunther. So if anything, Gunther probably gives a little too much in his matches, I would have to say.
Yeah. Cam, what do you make of the decision to take the title off of Jey, put it back on Gunther?
I used to be I was the kid who, when the old Batman show came on, I thought it was better when Batgirl was on because give me more heroes, right? I remember Armageddon 2000. You had that 6-pack Hell in a Cell match. What was it? Rock, Austin, Triple H, Undertaker, Kurt Angle, and Rikishi, funny enough. WWE has like this embarrassment of riches in the men's main event scene, right? You have, of course, your Roman Reigns, your Cody Rhodes, but then you have Drew and Punk and Seth and Damian Priest, and you got a lot of guys up there. But like organically over the last 4 years, Jey got there too, which nobody ever really expected, right? I remember being, I was at, I think the Palms for WrestleMania night 1 because I'll never go to both nights and sit in that booth ever again. But like, the whole like beach area, the whole pool area is yeeting for Jey and the arenas do that. There's this really, really crazy, not crazy, but you know how the internet is. The internet decides that, hey, this thing isn't actually good. Even though every crowd is going crazy, even though we're selling 1 million t-shirts, this thing isn't actually good because we know good wrestling, because we're the internet. Jey is one of those like most like organic successes that they've had in so long, especially a guy who is maybe part of their best tag team ever, right up there with the New Day. Him coming along is just the craziest thing. I do think this though. I interviewed him going into their second kind of Bloodline War Games, interviewed him going into the world title match. Like you said, the money's in the chase, man. It's a great moment that he won the world title, but really they did the same thing to him that they did to Gunther and the same thing they did to Cody in that, or not Cody, that they did to Kofi in that, yeah, you won the title, but we don't have anybody for you to face.
Yeah.
And they got guys, but they just chose not to do it. And I think maybe in Jey's case, they don't want to define anybody down. We don't want you to beat Drew. We don't want you to beat Priest, whoever you have up there. And I think it did do him a disservice, but now you have a guy. I think he's going to hang around there in that main event scene. You got another guy you can plug in there. But I also think that, like, look at how quickly he won and lost the Intercontinental title. But it was still up from there. I think he's in a great position. I just think that they really did not have it in them to where he's going to beat anybody outside of Gunther. And, I agree with Brian in that, Gunther is one of my absolute favorites, man. He's a T-800, man. He's a Terminator. Goes in there, he kills you. He does take a lot of battle damage, but he goes in there and he's a killer. I believe every word he's ever said, whether it was true or not. I think that the money with Jey is in the chase, but I also think that that's a guy you got to keep interested. So hopefully, like again, huge fan of the guy. I don't know if he's had the same fire that he had going up to winning the title, right? I think it's somebody you got to keep interested. Hopefully they have something interesting for him to do. But I like Gunther as world champion all the time, every time. I really do.
And sometimes the goal is just like you get a guy to the level, like you were saying, where he's a utility player. Like he's a guy you can always plug in. It doesn't mean he always has to be on top. It doesn't mean it's a failure if he loses. Like he's there and he's going to stay there because people love him. He's way over. And I hate to say, but I think a big difference between him and the Kofi situation is that the fans turned on Kofi. Like the fans rejected him. It was really ugly to watch. And they were just like, it was almost like they just didn't see him as a world champion. I don't think that's the problem with Jey. I don't think there is a problem with Jey. I don't think that they rejected him at all. And it's just now he's there. LA Knight is an example where he's a guy now. They got him to a point where he could be up here if they need him to be. He could be down here if they need him to be. He can just go where they need him to go, and he's credible. He can be plugged in. He could be in a mid-card feud and then immediately, messing with a main event heel, and people will buy it. So I think that's, for a lot of guys, that's the goal, and that's where he's at.
I think those are both really good comparisons, Kofi and LA Knight, but for different reasons. My concern is that, well, two things for those comparisons. Kofi had the belt a lot longer than Jey did, and I think the problem, my concern with Jey is that even though he wasn't failing, some people are going to interpret this as a failure because he only had it for 2 months. I think in that time he defended it successfully once.
Yeah,
right?
just the Logan Paul. I think that was the only one.
Yeah, he also defended against Seth, but I think these were DQs or what have you. So I think you can't help but look at his world title run as a failure, and it's true that maybe he works better in the chase, but he finished the chase. He got the world title, and he had it for 2 months. So I don't see them putting him back. It's all to say that it would seem to me that we've seen the last of Jey Uso, world champion, and that it only lasted 2 months, I think defines him down unnecessarily, because I think he showed that he did have the makings of a top guy. And you're right. I think I've said all along, and I thought about him somewhat with the truth stuff. I thought all along that those clamoring for LA Knight to be a top guy, to be a world champion, I think it was too much for him. I think he's in the right spot now as that sort of gatekeeper to the main event scene. And I'd be fine with Jey Uso having that same role. I might argue that Jey Uso had more of an upside than LA Knight did. I think his story was more compelling, and I think with LA Knight, and I like him a lot, but I think he's one of these guys. Joe Hendry maybe fits the bill too, where it's sort of become like a meme. It's like the thing to do was to get behind this guy, and because of that, they might be pushed beyond their ability. Where Jey, I feel like it was truly organic. I feel like this guy sort of like crawled up from the bottom, and for years people were seeing something in him, like this guy really got something, and that got to the pinnacle, earned it, I would say, and it was kind of kicked off unceremoniously. I'm really sort of disappointed with their handling of the Jey Uso thing. I think you could have done exactly what you did. Give it a few more months. I mean, why couldn't he hold it through SummerSlam? Or if he lost the title to Seth Rollins at SummerSlam, something like that, I would have been fine with it.
And that's what I mean. It's like you could just tell that they just didn't want to wait that long. There was something that clicked where they said, "Nah, you know what? We're going to change course here." Like, I just don't think they thought, "Yeah, eventually you're going to lose it back to Gunther on Raw." Or what was it, SmackDown? It was Raw, right? I mean, I don't think was in anybody's booking sheet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. A couple of things coming out of Money in the Bank. Well, first, the Money in the Bank winners: Seth Rollins on the men's side, Naomi on the women's side. Cam, any thoughts on either of those? And with Seth, he seemed like the only guy who really could win it in that match, but also a lot of people, I think, critical, like, does he really need it? He was already a top guy. He doesn't need a briefcase to get a world title main event at any time. So, I imagine it's part of a storyline that they have in their head that they want to pay off.
Naomi's proof that you can be a career babyface and have the right thing happen to where you're a credible heel.
I think she's much better as a heel. Yeah, I'm really enjoying her as a heel.
Like, we're watching John Cena work way too hard to try to do the thing, when Naomi was just like, beat somebody down, go really crazy, like, just she's doing great. And it's going to be fun, with her kind of being really vindictive and unhinged, who she goes after and how she goes after them. That'll be fun to watch. I think, kind of on the men's side, Seth has a really great history, with a John Cena, even though they both be heels. He's done good stuff with Gunther. And, Seth has been basically the main event guy on Raw for the last decade. Like, it sounds like a long time, right? But, like, yeah, he's been the guy. Like you said, didn't really seem like anybody else was in that position. I always think that Money in the Bank functions the best on heels anyway. You have those, those few times like when RVD called his shot and set it up like at a specific event. But yeah, I think those are the right two people. I think they were really fun matches on top of that. But yeah, I'm all in on where Naomi is right now. And Seth always does good work, so I'm sure that'll work out like the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. Brian, I don't see Seth cashing in anytime soon, because who would he cash in on, right? I mean,
I think it was something where it was just a foregone conclusion, because he had done all these promos and talked about hijacking the business and becoming this terrorizing force and everything. And so if he didn't win it, it would just feel like, well, where is that going? I feel like with him having it, then it adds to his persona as being this kind of menacing presence that's hanging over everybody. Now, on top of all that, he can literally just show up at any time and challenge anybody for the title. Like you said, though, probably not going to happen anytime soon, because why would he do it on Gunther? Although stranger things have happened than for him to do it on Cena. I don't know if that's entirely out of the question, even as a heel, because he seems to be one of those weird heels who is sort of like still kind of cheered by a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think that'll happen, but it's way more likely than him doing it against Gunther. But in all likelihood, he's probably going to hold on to it for a while, because that also serves their benefit too, because then they could really like drag it out and have it hanging out there for a long time. You never know when he's going to do this. When is he going to do it? Especially as a heel. I'm not the hugest fan at this point. Now that they've been doing it for like 740 years, I'm not the biggest fan of the Money in the Bank concept in general anymore. We've talked about it. I think those like cash-ins on the fly, they're okay for heels, but when you kick off a baby face that way, to me, it's immediately tainted and it immediately hurts them, because you're saying, well, yeah, you took advantage of somebody who was half dead, and it happened with Liv Morgan when she was a face on Ronda Rousey. It was like, well, okay, I could have probably gone in there and pinned Ronda Rousey at that point after what she'd been through, So I just think it's a worn out concept, but it's better if a heel has it than if a face has it.
Yeah, I think it jinxed Damian Priest's world title reign, and his whole main event run was that
because he was just a tool in the CM Punk Drew McIntyre feud. That's all it was.
Yeah. Another big story, probably the biggest story coming out of the men's Money in the Bank, was involving somebody who wasn't in it, which was Jacob Fatu. I guess completing his babyface turn. Crowd goes nuts when you talk about it. There's a lot of conversation here about guys who organically become main event stars, and some who have some of it. Some they check a certain number of boxes, others not. A few more. I feel like Jacob Fatu checks all the boxes. Will be a world champion, and I think he's a baby face, right? I mean, and he could do the exact act that he's doing now. It's kind of a babyface act anyway, just against a heel opponent, and it may work better because they're going to sell better for him, when he does some of this stuff. Cam, but what do you see as Jacob Fatu's upside now that he's a babyface?
This is going to sound weird, but I mean this sincerely. Some of my favorite people are people who have been to prison. I'm dead serious. There's an authenticity and like a genuineness. I remember when WrestleMania was in Philly, I missed my flight going home. Why did I miss my flight? Because me and Jacob Fatu are at the hotel bar, and we're ordering drinks, and we're talking. I had met him like a few years before, and the bartender forgets about us. And there's just a bunch of drinks there, so we look around. We just gotta grab them all. And we're just going and going and going and going and going. Next thing I know, it's 8 a.m, and my flight was at 7. Just one of the most fun guys to be around. I think, but I think that permeates in a way that's hard to explain. There's an authenticity about him that you just can't deny. Mm-hmm. There's an appreciation, I think, for the position that he's in, where he gives everything that he has. There's nothing fake about him. Like, that's all him. And then there's also, I was thinking about a joke before about talking about big guys who can do flips down the street.
Yeah.
It always kind of shocks you when you see a big guy do a cartwheel and a backflip. He also has that. He also has that crazy athleticism. There's just so many cool things about him that are. He's the perfect U.S. champion, perfect intercontinental champion. Like those being what they call, workhorse titles. He checks off all the boxes to be in that position, and people want to get behind him and support him. He's an extension of that crazy Islander, but not in a derogatory way. In a way that he comes across as like totally in control of his feelings and thoughts. He's great. He's fantastic. And I don't even know if you'd necessarily say it was a risk bringing him in with the prior history because, everybody's a risk. But I think he's great. I think he's fantastic. And I also think Solo's role in it all is so underrated. He's actually hilarious. If you watched him in that match kind of do everybody's gimmicks, I think he is the perfect jump off point for a Jacob. And I'm watching those two go at it. It's going to be great. I think Jacob Fatu is incredible. What they get for them, for sure.
Solo's really changed gears in the last few months. You might be looking to step into the R-Truth spot that's opening up as the comedy act. But, I mean, it's a 180 for him where he's kind of been a clown lately. I'm not crazy about it. I mean, again, sort of like with Truth, it's sort of like I guess he got nothing to lose because it wasn't like Solo was setting the world on fire in the role that he was playing. So might as well.
He was put in a position he was not ready for, I think, and that harmed him.
Yeah, but Brian, Cam talked about him being a great U.S. Champion, a great Intercontinental champion. Could he be more? Could he be not just a world champion, but could he be the guy in the way that few others have been in the last 10, 20 years?
Well, I think he's a great example of somebody who is benefiting from this being the post-Vince McMahon WWE, because I think that Vince probably wouldn't have seen him as anything more than the dangerous henchman of the bloodline, the big enforcer, scary guy who never talks in the bloodline. And I think that may have even been their original idea anyway. But the thing that he brings to the table, which we've talked about this on here, Al, about how he's a throwback in the sense that in the days before all this developmental stuff, right? Guys would come in, man, and they were ready to go because they had been doing their thing for years in major companies. They were polished. Yeah. They walk in the door, King Kong Bundy, Ravishing Rick Rude, Paul Orndorff. You didn't see these guys on a national level as green rookies who didn't know what they were doing. They walked in the door and you knew this guy is a polished pro. And that's Jacob Fatu. I mean, he's got all the experience in the world. He's been a world champion other places. He's been a top star other places, main event, and he's walking in the door ready to go. And he has that over a lot of other people. I knew when I went to and you were there too, right? I was at the Nassau Coliseum Saturday night's main event, and I'm walking out, and it's one of these things, and everybody around me, crowds of people, everybody's going, "I love you, Solo! I love you, Solo!" And I'm going like, man, if they made that a shirt, that would be the number one thing on shop this week. I just feel it like, wow, this guy is more than just the enforcer for this group. And I think they probably saw that too. Like he's really got a leg up on a lot of the people that are there. He's a great, I think I agree with you. I think the sky's the limit potentially with him. He could be whatever they want him to be.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It kind of goes back to the discussion of the importance of pushing Black wrestlers and beyond, skin color. Obviously, I think the value is tapping into a certain demographic. And I think back to like at a time where wrestling promoters were getting it. So remember like PN News and Men on a Mission, and it's like, these kids today, they like the hip hop music, that's what they roll out. And whether it's Jey or Fatu, I think they're capturing authenticity is the word in youth culture, street culture, that in a way that few people have in the past. He's about to say like they're cool. Right. And like, young kids wouldn't be embarrassed getting behind these guys because, like they get it, they're relatable, and that goes a long way. So it's good. And Samoans of all things.
Are you trying to say that PN News did not have legit street cred? Is that what you're trying to say? I was reading something recently in a book. They were talking about how I think it was Ranger Ross. There was a black wrestler who was suing WCW for lack of opportunities in like 91. And right there in the lawsuit, one of the things they had mentioned was like, not only are black wrestlers not, and this is before Ron Simmons, not only are black wrestlers not getting good opportunities in WCW, you have two white wrestlers, and they mentioned PN News and Johnny B. Bad, who are basically playing.
Was white? I don't even know.
Yes.
Really? He's a white guy?
Yeah, he was a white guy. So they were like, not only that, you have two white wrestlers who are playing essentially black wrestlers.
Oh,
Johnny
nice.
B. Bad is supposed to be Little Richard. And like they couldn't even find black wrestlers to play those gimmicks.
Yeah.
So how bad is this company? That was like one of the things that was mentioned in the lawsuit.
Yeah. Well, you also remember like Yoshi Kwan from that era, was it Christian?
Well, you could, yeah. And they put a mask on Hercules and made him like the Japanese super destroyer so you wouldn't see his face. Yeah. That was the dying days of that, right?
Yeah. All right, I think we covered a lot of ground there. Anything else that I missed? I mean, not a small, it shouldn't be a small thing, but I'm surprised to see Cena and Punk in Saudi Arabia. I mean, Cam, you talked about it. John Cena's got very limited dates going forward, so there are like all the dream matches you've got to do. To me, Punk was all, if not at the very top, in the top three. So I'm thinking this has got to be SummerSlam, something huge, and doing it on Night of Champions in Saudi Arabia. I was really disappointed, with a 3 weeks build or something like that. That's another thing that made me wonder whether they shifted, whether this was supposed to be SummerSlam, and now because Truth is getting the momentum that he did, are they calling an audible? Well, let's just do Cena and Punk at Saudi, and we'll see where Ron Killings is, a month or so from now for SummerSlam.
I mean, I feel like the Saudi shows are always give us everything you got.
Yeah.
Like the biggest thing you can think of, that's what we want. That's what we paid for. Like, let's put that up.
Yoko's in there, the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, bring it back.
Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, really, outside of a Roman Reigns or a Rock, the biggest Cena match you can have is CM Punk, I believe. Right. So, I mean, that's kind of, that's what they pay for. That's what they promote. They haven't said it, but they've said it, I guess. So, that's what we expect to happen. But, I could definitely see, because, personally, I don't watch those shows. Some people feel the same way. It's absolutely something you can run back at SummerSlam without it feeling like a retread. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. That's true. It doesn't. You could still do it at SummerSlam, maybe a rematch with higher stakes. So you could do the non-finish at Saudi in their first match, I guess.
And I also think one of the reasons they're doing this from a storyline point of view, why specifically Saudi, is because it's Saudi Arabia, and the whole idea that it's very cynical to me, because part of the thinking is, okay, well, John Cena is a complete sellout, because if you remember, Cena was also somebody early on. He got over it, but he was somebody early on who refused to go to Saudi Arabia. So the unspoken thing, the subtext here is like Cena sold out. He goes to Saudi Arabia now, and now he's going to drag Punk there with him. Is
this forced match there?
Yes, Punk. Yeah. Punk. It's like the idea here is he's forcing Punk to sell out just like him. You want to wrestle me? You want to face me? You have to compromise your principles and come out there and do this. The infamous tweet against the Miz and all that stuff. But the reality is, so we cut through the kayfabe and the storyline and all the angles and everything. It is CM Punk selling out to go to Saudi Arabia. And to me, it's a very bad look. It's very bad optics. I'm a big CM Punk defender. I like the guy. I think he's a great wrestling star. I think he's a true pro. He's a prima donna. He's difficult. Nothing wrong with that. The great ones often are. I don't have a problem with that. But I can't defend this. This is just a sellout move. And I see, he's a businessman and he sees it from the point of view of this is going to be a big deal by virtue of the fact that nobody expects me to do it. This is so I can't turn this down, because from a business standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, but it is very disappointing to me.
Years ago, and I just to jump in really quick, years ago, Punk was on AEW television and he was wearing, it might have been, I think it was a pro-choice shirt, I want to say, right? And they were in some suburb of Dallas. And people were like, look at Punk showing support to the cause in Texas. And I was like, it's not really Texas. Like, it's Dallas. Like, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, these are major cities where everybody in the city feels the same way that Punk does. It's cool that he's doing it, but he's not MLK. You know what I mean? He's not Malcolm X. Right. It's cool. I think it's cool. And so I think, and people got really, really mad at me for saying that. And again, I'm a huge CM Punk fan. I love CM Punk. I think that, watching kind of the discourse around it, disappointment is also a thing that I feel, but I also kind of feel like, he's a wrestler going to the wrestling show. It would be cool if he wasn't going to the wrestling show, but he's a wrestler going to the wrestling show. But like you said, Brian, that's the really interesting part of it, is that like Cena dragging him to hell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's really just like two guys trying to get their money up. Like a lot of guys. It's
well, that's the thing. I mean, people forget sometimes that these guys are businessmen and they're looking to make money. And there is a certain cynicism to wrestling when it comes to these social issues. Like, one thing that, as a wrestling historian who's researched like a lot of really early wrestling for books and for articles and things, something that doesn't get talked about is a lot of times wrestlers get brought up from the past because they were breaking segregation lines in wrestling, like somebody like a Sputnik Monroe who did that in Memphis. Freddie Blassie did it in Georgia. The Sheik did it when I wrote his book. The Sheik did it in Texas, where they were, putting over the black fans. They were trying to get the crowd integrated, and they were very public about it. The sad reality of that, and I hate to be the bubble burster here, is if you look at all three of those guys, they were all heels, okay? And they were all heels in Southern territories, and they were trying to get heat. I'm not saying that they didn't care. I didn't know any of those three people as individuals. I met Freddie Blassie once or twice, but they were doing business. They were. It would have been very different if a babyface wrestler did that. They were heels that were trying to piss off the white fans, and I think that sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle of history. These guys are businessmen. And I guess you can't forget that. And if you don't forget that, you'll be disappointed less often,
Yeah. I think like there's, in 2025, the levels of like kayfabe and sort of like meta kayfabe are so different that, you can't try to get fans to be okay with this because you tell the story of John Cena is forcing Punk to go to Saudi, because nobody's going to buy that. But
yeah,
thinking of it in sort of a kayfabe way, what WWE should be more concerned about is the what it does to the image of your rebel CM Punk to have him work in Saudi at all, even if he wants to, right? Even if he's saying, "Oh, dude, like I of course I'll do it for that paycheck." Somebody should be mindful of, it's probably not a good look for you to go over there because it's going to hurt your reputation as the anti-authority rebel. And that's sort of the bigger picture that you would think WWE would be more mindful of, is he loses a little bit of cred doing this, even if in the end of the day, like you said, he's a pro wrestler who is more than happy to get over there and get a huge paycheck. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much. We've been doing this for a while now. Cam, anything you want to promote? You wear so many hats. Anything you want to talk about where people can find your work?
Yeah, for sure. Across social media, Seahawk, CEEHAWK, Instagram, Twitter. You can find me at theringer.com. You can find me at Yahoo Sports Uncrowned. Most recently, again, talked about the 2011 CM Punk John Cena match, kind of where both guys were building up to that point and kind of where that propelled them. Coming up, we got, it's still about a month out, but doing some really cool stuff at AEW All in Dallas. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, you can follow me across the socials, typically writing something weekly or bi-weekly at Yahoo Uncrowned.
Right. Real quick, because you mentioned your thoughts on Okada and Omega at All In. That's huge.
One, yeah, it's going to be really, really cool. I do think it's interesting that they're looking to, have a unified title and to have it on the level of the AEW World title. It's going to be interesting to see how they manage that. But man, that's going to be a fantastic match.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it becomes the match I'm most excited about for All In, and hopefully it gets the treatment it deserves. We've talked about what should headline All In, and this becomes. I don't expect it to, but I wouldn't be mad if they close the show with Okada and Omega. Brian, what have you got going on?
Well, I'm very close to a cover announcement for Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon. I'm actually looking at cover designs. We're going through rounds of that. We're close. I'm hoping in the next few days to be able to put a cover out. And once I do that, I'm going to really be pushing the hell out of it. I've been afraid to push the book too hard because it doesn't come out till the end of September. When I pushed the Sheik book very early, there was so much pre-ordering that Amazon ran out of copies even before the publication date, which sounds like a good problem, but people were very, very angry because they had pre-ordered and they still weren't getting the book. So I'm trying to be a little more conservative this time, but yeah, I should have a cover soon. There's also my podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, which is rolling along. It's an old school wrestling podcast. So for people who like that, I've got different guests every week. And the Patreon for Shut Up and Wrestle, I want to mention because it's where I do watch along commentaries for historic wrestling cards. So people can go there and check that out. I just recently did one for, in fact, we're talking about Ron Simmons. I just recently did one for the WCW Saturday Night episode from 1992 that included Ron Simmons' title win on there. And I also, from time to time, I've started posting on there scans of some of my older articles from older magazines and things like that on there that are even free for subscribers to the Patreon. The commentaries are not free, but those things are. So it's patreon.com/shutupandwrestle.
Yeah. Both of you guys do fantastic work. Definitely follow you. You've got your Twitter handles there below. Thanks so much, guys, and we will be back soon.